All right, good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to call the Tuesday, October 4th, 2022 Roanoke County School Board work session to order. Madam Clerk, if you would call the roll, please.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am.
Here. Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to say I'm glad we've got some class here today.
Thank you, Mr. Greenway.
Behind you, exactly. Well, it's all around us.
He was looking at me.
But we've got Williamburg Principal here. How about that?
Very nice. And actually, I think we're going to start with her. So item 2.01, recommendation to name William Byrd High School football field at Patterson Stadium for retired coach Jeff Highfill. Superintendent Nicely.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So as the board is aware, several years ago, the board adopted a new policy regarding the naming of schools and school facilities. So school facilities, which are parts of schools, can be named after individuals that are well-deserving. There's a process that was established. Committee actually did that. And it's reserved for folks who have really made significant contributions to our schools. And the process involves making sure there's community support, making sure there's support of parents and students. And then once the school makes that request, it comes over here. I form a committee to make sure that the process and procedure's been followed. And so this evening, we're here to present the request and make the recommendation that we approve the request for naming the football field at Byrd High School for Coach Highfill. And we'll ask Ms. Newcomb to sort of present that case. If the board is in agreement with this, the plan is for at the next regular board meeting, we'd actually have the delegation and folks come. You actually formally would approve it, but we'll celebrate that at that time if the consensus of the board is to move forward. So I'll let Ms. Newcomb kind of tell us a little bit about Coach Highfill and the reason for the honor.
Okay, so I have a packet for you that was the process that we went through. Okay, so the first part of the packet, this is exactly what I gave the committee. So in January of 2022, yes, I received the letter to me. I think it had already been brought to Dr. Nicely earlier by, if you see the letter that Dale Foster had composed. I know that he and Mr. Patterson, who was the principal at William Byrd High School, had met with Dr. Nicely when Mr. Highfill had first announced his retirement. Since then, of course, we all know that Mr. Patterson has passed away. Anyhow, we went over the policy, Dr. Nicely did with this group, and so then they sent me the letter. And that is when I started looking into how we were going to proceed with this process, knowing that we were still sort of in the midst of COVID, not sure what renovation was going to look like. I wasn't sure of the timeline of how to do this. So Dr. Nicely I was grateful for his leadership on how to go about it. So the first thing I did was talk to Mr. Highfill and make sure that he was even wanting this to happen. One thing about Coach Highfill is he is a man of few words. He's not someone who wants to show me the glory. He's very quiet. And so there is a letter attached that I did have him put it in writing that he would want to be considered for the honor of our field to be named after him. On the back of the letter that Dale Foster sent, you'll see his resume. And I want to point out and say that the field's not being named after him because of wins and losses. The wins and losses with Coach Highfill has to do with his impact on the kids for years that attend William Byrd High School. Not only was a football coach, but he was also the first soccer coach at our school and started that program and coached that until 2016. So that's from 1982 to 2016, he coached our soccer team. And I remember that as a student because we didn't have girls soccer or anything like that. It's the first time I ever even heard of soccer, to be real honest with you. So that was pretty impressive. He also was our head football coach for 38 years. when I took over at William Byrd High School, he was still coaching there, and I knew him as a student. I knew him as a coach from when I was at the principal at William Byrd Middle School, but I didn't really know him as well as I did when I actually got to work with him and saw the impact he had on children. Today, he still comes to all of our games. He still contacts students from the past, from years ago. They reach out to Coach Highfield for advice. He has attended numerous weddings of our past players and, all kinds of support from Coach Highfield. I had a student who is a senior this year but was an 8th grader, Coach Highfield's last year, who came to me because he wanted him to be part of any type of college decision. He wants Coach Highfield's advice. He has a great relationship with our current coach, but that's also the impact that he had with Coach Highfield. He still calls students who are in college right now to check on them to see how they're doing. So Coach Highfield had a huge impact on a lot of now men and young men during his tenure at William Byrd High School. So after we got that recommendation, I formed a committee at our school, and the ones chosen to be on that committee were folks who have been at William Byrd for a long time, who knew him as a coworker, who knew him as their coach and then coworker, and I handed them the same packet that you have. And I did not give an opinion. I asked for a vote, and it was unanimous that they felt like that should happen. And then I brought in students. I did have a parent on that committee also, Mrs. Richards, who was also a student at Byrd, whose kids have gone through William Byrd and played for him. So she was part of that committee also. And then lastly, I had our student leadership at William Byrd. They're not football players. I had one football player. I had soccer. I had, you can see the names on, that's the last piece of paper that I gave you. Those are our dog pound leaders, our volleyball captain, our SCA president, our top terrier for this year. And we talked about what it meant to have something named after you and what that means. They had some really great questions about impact, and the one thing that they did point out also was it's not about wins and losses. It's about what he has done for other students. So I am in support of naming our turf field after Coach Highfield.
I'll just add one more thing, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Newcomb was alluding to the now late Bob Patterson, coming in. How long was he principal at Byrd High School?
35 years, I think.
So 35 years as principal, and it was actually he and Bays Wilson, who was superintendent 30 years ago when I started at Roanoke County, were the two that came in and thought this was such an important initiative that they wanted to find out what the process was and make that recommendation. So to me, it says a whole lot that people of that stature, made this recommendation as well.
And Dale Foster has reached out to me. He's actually the one who wrote this letter, and Mr. Blevins, Dave Blevins, who was principal at Hidden Valley, but he was assistant principal at Byrd for many years. So he also has reached out to me by phone and talked to me and expressed his desire for this to happen.
Mr. Chairman, I would absolutely 100% agree with the recommendation. First off, we did it the right way. He's here. He's been retired now 2 years from coaching.
This is
Is it
fourth.
Fourth?
This is
Okay.
his 4th year, but he
And
comes to every single game.
He does. You'll see him up on the press box. He's still up there watching, and he comes to a lot of the basketball games still. And so he's a unique gentleman, and he actually came in '81, and the only reason I know that is because it was the first year. I know it sounds like it was back in the dark ages, which it was, but it was the first year I was a senior. And so he's coached 38 years.
Right.
And he was the thing that you said that stuck out most with me and that is so true, and I was going to mention is it's more than the football, it's more than the soccer, it's the person that he was. And just a wonderful person. We've never, with every coach, you'll have, well, little Johnny's not playing, or he's not doing this, or he's not running that, or whatever. But you never, ever heard one complaint, or at least I never did, and I'm assuming Ms. Newcomb either, about his character, his demeanor with the kids, the way he worked with students. And you probably know Dave, Timmy Fouts. He was an assistant, and Timmy will, go to battle with him. He loved him, worked with him for years until he finally stepped down as well. But just a couple years before Mr. Highfield. But yeah, I concur and thank you and the committee that put this together. And for Mr. Patterson to give anybody a recommendation says, yeah, he would have never gave me one, but says multitudes. He would have told me what I needed to do differently and how he did that a few times. But he's Coach Highfield was a special individual.
He also was a teacher for Roanoke County Schools for, I think, 33 years, 34 years. He taught math.
And he's retired from that also.
He retired from teaching, I think, 10 years before. When RCCC closed, I believe, is when he stopped teaching.
Any other questions? Mr. Ray?
No, just comment. I did not know Coach Highfield, but after hearing the presentation and certainly the resume and certainly accolades that he has and the devotion that he has given his life to that school and to the kids. And I think that's stands within itself, and so I will support the motion.
Thank you.
Couple questions, just confirming that they have adhered to the 2017 policy?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And then the costs involved with the naming will come from William Byrd High School?
Right.
And not central office or any of our funds?
Right.
Okay. Any other questions?
But if it did need to come from our central funds, we would be more than happy to make that. Right?
That's not the way it worked the last time, I don't think, so I don't know that we do want to change that.
I'm good with it. I'm just kidding.
But you can donate as much as you need to.
Well, we're going to get it done. That's the key.
Good. All right.
Thanks. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Newcomb. Item number 2.02, presentation from doctoral study by Dr. Tom McCracken
Where do you want me?
Come right up here, sir.
in the hallway.
Right next to Dr. Nice. How cool is that?
2 doctors.
Doctor.
I think I
All
got
right,
my
so-
through.
I think it's a line from a movie.
I get a gift for you, and a gift for you, and a gift for you,
He's the gift that keeps
and
on
a
giving.
gift for you. I am. Thank you. And a gift for you,
Thank
and a
you.
gift for you. So first of all, Mr. Chairman, school board members, Dr. Nicely, thank you so much for having me back. Mr. Greenway, if you remember last time I was here, it was about naming something, and it went kind of funny. Do you remember that?
Let's move on.
All right, that sounds good.
Otherwise, I might hear North Korea.
Yeah. Oh, Dave, Tim, stop. All right. So, how are you, sir? Well, good. When I was in the 4th grade, we're going back a little bit, I was 11 years old, 10 years old, and a whole bunch of kids got me. They threw me up on a fence, stripped me, tied me up there, and left me up there for a couple hours till my mom drove by, saw me hanging up there, and came over. And the thing that got me then, even in 4th grade, was, I had a couple of those kids in that group I was friends with. And they didn't do anything. They didn't say anything. They just left me up there. They were scared. They didn't know what to do. They weren't equipped. They weren't resourced. I didn't know that then, but now I do. And so ever since then, I've been very proactive when it comes to bullying. Bullying is a very passionate, personal issue for me. What I just gave you is a published article that I authored called Peers, Parents, and Policies, and that is just a summation of all of the work that I'm going to overview briefly here. In 2015, some of you remember when I was running for the school board, my campaign platform was school safety and security. One of the pillars was bullying. And I believe I was elected into that position because of my campaign promises to focus on safety. So this has been an issue with me for a long time. In 2017, if you all remember, there was a local student that was the victim of bullying and she killed herself. It culminated in suicide. The community was very upset, so I decided to call a community meeting at Community Church, where I pastor. We had about 400 or 500 people attend that. I think, Mr. Hudson, you were there for that in 2017. But it showed me that this was something I'm not just passionate about. This is a community issue. This is a real thing. And from that 2017 meeting, I started the Anti-Bullying Alliance, and within just Facebook group, within just a week, we had over 1,000 people, and you had to be qualified and vetted to get into that. You had to have a student in public schools. And from that, we had a second meeting at Community Church in 2018. About 250 attended that one. It was more designed for politicians, superintendents, school board members, agents of change, policymakers. I was trying to get their attention and get some feedback from them. And we had a lot of politicians and superintendents and board members attend that meeting. From those two meetings from 2018, 2019, I addressed hundreds of emails and had well over 50 in-person meetings from public places like the library to homes, even in schools. Again, just this is a big issue for a lot of people. So I started researching. And in 2017, I was a PhD candidate in organizational management and at Carolina University. Because of all this bullying thing, I changed my subject from business to education, and I got an education specialist degree. My dissertation for my doctorate, which I got a couple months ago, the dissertation title is How to Improve the Number of Peer Interventions During Bullying Incidents at a school that I used as a study. So my thought, and I think October is a great time, yes.
Could you repeat the title of your dissertation?
Absolutely. How to improve the number of peer interventions during bullying incidents. And there was a certain school that I studied that is not public. So I'll just do a general overview of my findings nationally and locally. But this data is both. October is anti-bullying month anyway, so blue is the color. Well done, Mr. Linden. You're a great man. I don't care what Dr. Nicely says about you. Sorry. So here very quickly, here are the general recommendations. And again, this is a culmination of 7 years of collecting data nationally and 2 years fairly locally. So again, I'm a data-driven guy. I know there's a problem. 160,000 public school students absent themselves from schools every single day in America. 88% of students witness bullying, and this goes beyond the personal, relational, verbal, physical. This is cyberbullying as well. 88% of students witness it. Under 30% ever say anything or do anything. So they walk away from that fence, leaving Tom McCracken hanging up there. Here's the biggest data point for me is that if somebody would step up, and this is peer intervention, which most schools are not fully embracing. If a student would step up, speak up, and say something, hey, there's Tom up there on the fence, we need to stop that. Regardless of relationship, this could be a brand new student that has physical issues everybody's making fun of, nobody knows, there does not have to be an existing relationship with the kids, the victim, or the perpetrator, or the witnesses. If somebody would just speak up and say stop, 60% of bullying instances would stop within 10 seconds. So we know that it's a big issue. We know that people aren't saying anything. We know that it affects a vast majority of students. And now we know, and I know it's skimming it, but now we know that there are things we can do and we have a lot of data to back that up. So recommendations I would make through the 7 years of research, and I Googled, just out of curiosity, Roanoke County bullying, and the first page that popped up, and these are local stories covered by local press. Parents voiced their concerns about bullying problem in Salem. That was the first meeting I held. Local parents want change from officials on bullying. That was the second meeting I held. Salem pastor wants to see new bullying policy in Roanoke. Roanoke County Schools local pastor joined forces for anti-bullying campaign. That's when the school board came in and had me collaborate with Dr. McClung and Dr. Hughes. Out of that, we gave wristbands. I purchased and donated 14,000 wristbands to be given out to all of our students, and I think those were a success. And so let me just basically give you some recommendations. And again, all of this is evidence-based, and I would love the opportunity to get more in detail. But I think we need eyes to existing policies. I think as you look nationwide, and certainly we're not exempt, most anti-bullying policies are outdated. They are not current. Many of them do not address cyberbullying. Generally, the attitude for schools has been that happens outside of campus, so we don't really do anything about it. And yet my research shows not only should we, but we can have a positive effect if we would address it. So I would recommend just putting eyes to our policies that we have so far, anti-bullying, current, and make sure they're holistic. Secondly, I would increase peer intervention training for all stakeholders. Most school districts, and I've been to all of them, I've done data collection on all of them, they focus primarily on the victim, on the bully, and that's pretty much the main focus. When it comes to training, anti-bullying training, the teachers, the major players, the major stakeholders, right? The teachers, administrators, students, sometimes parents, and that's pretty much it. Research shows if there's not a total buy-in for an anti-bullying initiative, it's not going to be successful. Teachers are not seeing all the bullying that's going on. Even when they see it, it's easy to think it's just banter. They don't have the relationships with the students to identify when bullying is happening, where students do. Students have everything they need. That's why 60% stop within 10 seconds when a student steps up, not when a teacher steps up. We have gnats. So all stakeholders would be transportation, IAs, cafeteria workers, coaches, parents. Involve every stakeholder in this for a total buy-in so that there is consistency across the board. Because right now, in many districts, there is not consistency. What central office and school board members want, have in mind, and believe have been implemented is different than what's happening in classrooms. Remember as a kid, you had a circle and one person at the beginning would whisper something, right? I like hot dogs. By the time it gets to the end, it's my grandmother likes Disney World. I mean, it's completely flipped. That is really what is happening when it comes to policy and expectations for anti-bullying. By the time it gets out of the school board policy and to central, and I'm talking general Virginia, by the time it comes to the classroom, it's my grandmother likes Disney World instead of I like hot dogs. And so training by incorporating everybody would be beneficial. Thirdly, improve surveillance, both physically and digitally. There's a lot to be said for hall monitors. In our current districts, teachers are primarily tasked. They believe when it's time for students to change out from one class to another, they go out in the hall. But they're saying, there's a stumbling block here. Number one, oftentimes I get caught up with a student, and they all go out in the hall and they're gone. Other times, and this is a reality, other times, I'm the only one out in the hall. None of the other teachers are doing what I'm doing. And so there's not as much presence. Back in the day, they used to have a student hall monitor that would just sort of be all out, and that was very effective. I don't know why we stopped that. But improving surveillance, not only physically but digitally, there are a lot of blind spots in every single school that have been identified. Bullying is not just happening in certain spots. So fourthly, incorporate cyberbullying. in not only policy, but in training. And let me just be very clear, I have the data to show that if peer intervention happens at the cyberbullying level, and, you know, when I got down from that fence, I went home. I went to my friends, I went to my family, and it was over. I was safe. There is no escape for our kids anymore. Their phones are dinging. There's no escape. And so we have to really address this, because even though it's happening off campus, it's still a distraction to student achievement, student success when they get into the classroom. And so we need to incorporate, my recommendation is cyberbullying with policy and with training and with our anti-bullying initiatives. Fourth, and there's only four, wristbands for stakeholders, I think, was a great idea. The research shows that the best demographic to train, to implement anti-bullying policy is when empathy is developing, when that cognitive development is happening. And that's happening in elementary school, first year, middle school, they're kind of learning. So up to 5th grade, middle school is a great demographic to start this. And as educators know, wristbands, visuals, they're a reminder. I think it was a great idea. The only thing I think we failed in doing is providing a pamphlet to explain what the wristbands were. You know, we handed them all out, but it was completely inconsistent, open for interpretation to whoever was distributing and whoever received. So my recommendation would be to have a trifold pamphlet that goes in the wristband, and there's room. When I bought the wristbands, they come in each individual package. You could just throw them in there. A little trifold packet that just breaks down, informing the parents and the student why we're doing this, what the research is, and then that last page we could even have them sign saying, I'm going to be a hero. I am going to step up and speak out when I see something. It'll be a constant reminder. It'll be something that will be incorporated, hopefully, in culture. Lastly, I served on a panel with Elizabeth Schultz a couple months ago. She is the Assistant State Superintendent, and her focus is on policy. I'm currently on a governor-appointed board in Virginia with our Virginia Secretary of Education, Amy Gadara. And so my goal is to be working on policy and a standalone anti-bullying initiative that will be based on a peer intervention model. Right now, there really is none. Roanoke County doesn't have it, Salem doesn't have it. We have PBIS, and as a sub of PBIS, one of the tiers does focus on anti-bullying, but there is no standalone model, and I believe that's where success would be. So I'm going to be working on that at a different level with different people. But the reason that I'm here is, first of all, to follow up. The school board sent me to central office to work on this, and then, you know, of course, I spent too long working on a doctorate just focused on this. And so I would hope, with all of my kids going through Roanoke County, I have a vested interest in Roanoke County. I love Roanoke County. I would hope and I would love to be involved in helping with policy and considering a standalone peer intervention model, since we know how successful it is. That's all I've got to say about that.
Very good information. I might take exception to your too long, because I see the passion, I hear the passion in your voice, and I know I appreciate everything you've done for the county schools up to this point. So, anybody have any questions, comments?
I'll say something.
Mr. Hudson.
I support Dr. McCracken in this, you know, from my time at being inside of a school on the law enforcement end, and, you know, all this cyberbullying he's talking about, the Facebook, all of the different social media, the Snapchat, the Twitter, and all this. I got to see that firsthand, and a lot of it right now, in talking with some of our SROs, is the sexting. And you know what happens? They use that once they get those pictures and something goes wrong in that relationship, it gets used as, you know, a bullying tactic. I think that it's imperative that we educate our children, educate our staff members to what to look for, like he spoke about. You know, nothing would be worse than a suicide like you talked about. And I think that we would be foolish not to implement these strategies to do everything we can to prevent something like that from happening. You know, beyond that, even looking further, we've got to provide a safe environment for our kids to thrive. They've got to feel safe. They got to want to come to school. If they're going to be miserable, they're not going to learn. So I think that we've got to do something, and I can't think of anybody better, since you've done all this research and your accolades, to help us get this moving forward.
Ms. Fashani?
Thank you, Tom. That was.
Thank you.
A great presentation. I think you hit the nail on the head, to be honest with you. This is, I'm sure, has been going on for a long time. I think it's important as a school board to take a step back. A lot of times we think we're doing a great job. We think we have great policies in place, and there's holes. And I think you really identified some of the holes. I mean, I didn't realize that we didn't, we have some things implemented, but they are probably antiquated and archaic and need updating. So I'm curious to know, are there any other states that you know of that have a turnkey program or anything like that that's already been established where they actually look at this the methodology to increase peer intervention for all the stakeholders, so you have the complete buy-in?
Right, I have books of data I'll certainly be more than willing to give to you. There are really no standalone peer intervention models. PBIS has just swept, and it's being used for all different things, and bullying is one of them. Peer intervention, just focusing on peer intervention, is relatively new, past 15, 20 years or so. Now it's starting to pick up momentum.
It's interesting because that would, to me, common sense-wise, be the first line of attack.
What did Andy Griffith tell Opie? A bully messes with him and you punch him back and it's over.
Yeah.
Now, I'm not condoning that.
But
it's
long
stopped.
gone are those days that you
And,
could.
if we're going to be limited and confined to how, we can still do. We can't hit, but we can say stop. Hitting might be 80% effective, to stop it. But, speaking up is, but again, it's not translating. Even when we're saying we need students to speak up when they see bullying, our students think and our teachers think that when a student sees bullying, they go to an adult. That's not effective. That's not effective.
In fact, I think if you go to adult, it probably gets worse.
That's a good point. And one of the reasons
Because
kids don't speak up is because they have a fear of retribution.
Yeah, it's the retribution, yeah.
So Dr. McCracken, with the pamphlets that you're talking about, would you be willing to work with our staff to, lay that out how you think it should look based off your research?
I'd be honored to. I would love to see this piece of paper hanging on my wall actually culminate to helping somebody.
I think it'd be great. The biggest thing is getting that right and then tasking our staff with the training, getting our policy written.
Well, the fact that you're already working with Elizabeth Schultz and Amy Cadera says to me that they're obviously interested in this program, and it sounds like something that is going to come down eventually.
I'm serving with the secretary on the Virginia Israel Advisory Board, but Melvin Adams and I are close, and once this gets taking, I wanted to start here.
Yeah.
Then we've got some ears, even in other states, to work on this. But I think we have a lot of potential to start something here before it goes anywhere else.
I would like to see that.
I would like to see that,
For us
too.
to be at the forefront of it.
Yes.
Because I've watched it firsthand, how it can affect a child, and it's not easy. So I'm definitely passionate about this, and I look forward to getting this taken care of.
I used to be on the fence.
Mr. Ray?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. All things and you have changed, these things that kids don't get away from. They go to bed, they may have this, there's cyberbullying going on, they read things, gets in your head, they see no way out. So they don't have a choice, it seems like sometimes. It's a whole different world now. It's a whole different with all the media and all the things that we have now. You don't get away from it. You go to, as you said before, you go to school, you have a little tit for tat, you go home, you come back, and it's sort of over. You don't hear about it all through the night. And kids don't jump on that person's bandwagon or other and help sort of feed the process.
Right.
So, this is certainly, something that, I experienced with my son in school, and I think maybe we talked about that at one time.
We did.
And it was a big thing because my mother was even going to go to the school. She was so upset. And he was just that type of student that didn't want confrontation. And you know, he lived with it, and he went through life with urinary problems because he wasn't able to go to the restroom because he wouldn't go all day. And you know, this is bullying. This is what it's about. He was afraid to go in. So, you know, I fully support how we can move this process and move this along. So, thank you for the presentation.
Thank you.
Mr. Greenway.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. So, Mr. McCracken, you said several things that struck with me, let alone the fence deal. On the fence.
Yes.
I like that.
Thank you.
Do we have, and this may be Dr. Nicely, I can't remember if we have student peer groups in all of our high schools as bullying mechanisms, in that we've talked about some other situations where we have student peer groups. Do we have anything?
When you say, do we have student peer groups, what are you asking
Well,
exactly?
for or kids, I'm thinking more in high school, because I like what you're saying, that we need to come down to the elementary school. It doesn't start at the high school, right? It starts down here where we learn it.
Right.
But I was thinking in the high schools, we had some student peer groups, but I don't know if we have it in all of the high schools.
Are you
where-
asking, are there like clubs that kind of
No, no,
focus
no,
on
not really a
prevention type
club.
things?
Something where if you're having something that needs to be mediated. Maybe it's not even bullying.
Like
but
peer mediation?
Yes,
Mhm.
yes. Do we
Yes.
have that in all the high schools? Could bullying be one of those items that could be incorporated into that? And if so, I think.
It depends, and I'm not the expert, that's Dr. Hughes' department, but typically, as far as like peer mediation, that comes into play when there's true conflict going on between two students. Whereas a bullying situation where you have that imbalance of power, so there's an intimidation factor or whatever, tends to be a little bit different kind of factor in terms of having a student mediate that. So it kind of depends on the situation, and that's where the counselors come in terms of trying to figure that out.
Well, but I think do I need to call you Mr. McCracken or Doctor?
I don't
I need
care.
to call you Dr. McCracken.
I don't care.
now, don't I?
Tom is fine.
So, but to his point of, several things with this. You know, I know that Ms. Newcomb has in the hallways, and maybe this is at the direction of Central, that we have it in all the high schools. And I'm starting at the high schools, because I don't even know that we haven't. I mean, we've got the PBIS, but I don't know that we specifically, am I wrong, address bullying in the elementary schools.
We absolutely do.
Do we? Okay, so is that a part of the PBI?
It's not focused on peer intervention.
Okay.
I mean, it's.
Well, not peer,
It's very
yes.
small.
Well, and so that's kind of why, that's kind of where I'm focusing, because if I heard you correctly, the peer intervention is more effective than the adult intervention.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely.
So
And
that's why I'm
recognizing and
asking,
intervening.
and maybe I need to be more specific, and this would probably take a lot of time, I realize, because obviously you put a lot of time into it. But my thought process is, we have at the high schools, we have a teacher sitting in each hallway, at least at Byrd, and I'm not sure about all of them, that is out there, even during class time. You know, maybe they're using their not their study time, planning time, you know, and they're out in the halls, whatever. And I asked this to Mr. McCracken because would that be a situation where you'd put a student out there and I don't know if that's the case, but for the interventions of, you know, the hallways, that's where it's usually gonna, you know, you're gonna have stuff at the high schools. It's just an interesting concept that you're talking about, the students being, and I really didn't think about that, but that the students are more effective than the adults. And if that be the case, most of what we do, if I'm not mistaken, is led by the adults.
Well, I think what Dr. McCracken's saying is, you know, when it comes to peer intervention, it's the bystander kind of person, the person he's describing who's in the midst of it, right? May not be any adults around, right? But are we encouraging, you know, the bystander who's witnessing that to speak up, right? And say, stop, right? And that's where the power is when you've got people kind of speaking up for each other versus just standing by and watching it happen.
But I guess that's my point, is that if we have more student-led opportunities for intervention, I guess.
And I think by the time, Mr. Greenway, you get to the high school level, from my research, the culture is already developed,
It's
kids are
already
already gonna be kids, but it could be more of a reinforcement tool.
But I bring that back down to the elementary school age children.
Right.
Where they're not as developed, with biases and mental different capacities, that, a first or second grader, or third grader, or whatever that kid, maybe it's fourth, fifth grade, because they're a little older in the schools, but they would, I guarantee you, if they see bullying instances, would say something where I'm not sure the 11th or 12th grader, because, that's my buddy, and gosh, I've got to be with him in football or something. I can't say anything.
Takes courage, right?
Right. And so that's why I'm saying, I like the idea. I didn't realize, like I said, the student versus adult. But if we start bringing that down to the elementary school and are more student-led, there may be opportunities to introduce that at a younger age, which then filters on up as they move through schools. And I
Fifth grade
like-
is one of the fundamental key demographics, right? That it's most successful, it's better absorbed, it's better practiced. But to implement it in middle school and high school, a peer intervention model, anti-bullying initiative, it's still very effective, no matter what age group you're looking at. But if we can get them younger when they're developing empathy, and I did a whole study on that, empathy is one of the greatest elements that we have to positively inject this
Makes
model.
absolute sense.
So,
And honestly, I would have never
Mr.
put that
Chairman,
together.
so then, Mr. Chairman, sorry, Tim. So the next step would be to have a committee perhaps, or are you gonna be meeting with, what's our next step?
Well, if the board would like more information about what we currently do and where we are, I'd be happy to have, Dr. Hughes give another presentation about that. I would suggest that'd be your next step.
And, well, I would love to have Tom come into this as well, Dr. Tom, in his red shoes, so that we can see what peer interventions that he's researched that we could implement into our future policies.
Yeah, I would love to
Yeah.
connect that with Dr. McClung and Dr. Hughes.
Yeah.
And then the
okay.
pamphlet and wristband is not a major investment monetarily.
I funded the last time.
Yeah.
So I don't see where that's going to be a big issue either. And I can't see why anybody would be against
That's right.
creating awareness and
Throughout the
educating
school
people
system,
through these
yeah.
pamphlets and wristbands.
One last question, and then I'll let it go, but cyberbullying or bullying outside the school, which I think, as you mentioned, yours was outside the school, right? It wasn't during school, right? So do we really have the capacity to act? And what if we do, I think we have a much better opportunity to not control the situation, but to help manage it and
Teach
foster
it.
it.
I think we teach those things rather than act. We can't act, tell some
Right,
parent, but
but a
we can
lot of
tell them what's
times-
happening. And it's up to the parent to make sure that they put these things away before they go to bed or whatever
I
it may
agree
be.
with that. What
Well, as
I'm saying-
educators, we have a responsibility, right? Whatever the distraction is, if you know the parents are drunk and beating their kid every day, as an educator, that has to be incorporated in your plan for their success. We know bullying is a distraction, and we know it's happening at home, probably more in some cases than physical or verbal or relational.
Well, and where I'm thinking is peer-to-peer students with cyberbullying. That's not something that is identifiable in terms of, if you're third or fourth grade, which hopefully you don't even have the computer, but you get to middle school, which is very prevalent. And, it happens outside of school. We hear this a lot at school board meetings or with students that come up. But if it could be dealt with before it gets to be the hotbed issue that it becomes when you get to this point.
And that's
That's
easy.
my only question. Can that?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
And again, it's empowering and equipping and resourcing all stakeholders. That's where we've got to include everybody. There has to be a collective buy-in here. If parents know, this is what we do, and if kids know, this is what we do, as soon as they witness it online, which everybody does, or it really wouldn't be as effective, right? Bullying is effective, but when there's more people watching, it's even more effective and hurtful, has
Good-
more
good point.
damage.
Good point.
Cyberbullying is witnessed as much as any other kind. And so it just takes a comment. It just takes a comment. You need to back off of Tom, get him off the fence, kind of a thing. And that is as effective as physical in-person bullying when it comes to that 60% within 10 seconds.
Great point, because when we have one of these issues that either it's a fight or something going on in halls, and the kids are standing around filming it, I think they're as guilty.
Oh, yeah.
And that
They're
comes down to
culpable.
policy. Are we doing anything to mitigate that through policy?
Absolutely. Absolutely, I totally
Well, to go
agree.
from 30% to 60%, I'm thinking that's pretty effective.
Well, and it makes sense because if it's coming from your peer, you're trying to fit in. You're trying to figure out, especially in middle school, I feel like you're trying to figure out where your place is.
True.
I mean, in a very simple way of putting it. And I think that you do care what your peers
Yep.
think. So when somebody says something, you're more apt to stop and you're more apt to care what they think versus what the principal or a teacher thinks.
There's a 6-year-old in ICU in Connecticut right now because of bullying. I mean, it's prevalent, it's happening, and I think we now have the information. I just think we need to be good stewards of that information.
And I think, you know, like the elementary, some of the worst, well, I probably shouldn't say this, some of the worst fights I had was in elementary school. And some of the best friends that I made was after those fights, after this. But those, also those bullies that were then, they went to middle school and they went on to high school doing the same thing. And I know for a fact, and I had a friend that actually, he ended up not living too long because of things that he did. And then he was one of the ones I got in the fight with, and broke his nose, and he knocked my tooth. But anyway, it was really, you know, but we were friends, but he kept on afterwards, and he ended up having a lot shorter life. And those things, you know, those things happen. But we have to start there in the elementary schools, knowing that it starts with them and it continues on.
Well, and we know depression is a real thing, especially coming out of COVID, all the different things that we experienced when everybody was locked in. And so we need to do something.
Very good information, Dr. McCracken. We appreciate your time,
Thank you all.
and we'll be in touch.
Yes.
See you, Tom.
Wanted to go back to item number 2.01, just to confirm for our deputy clerk, or our clerk, that that will be made a consent agenda item,
We're going to do it as an action, so you could actually
Vote.
vote.
action item?
Yes,
Okay.
sir.
It'll be an action item on next Thursday's agenda. Thank you. Item 2.03, the 2023-2024 budget calendar proposal. Ms. Peterson.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
It's hard to believe I'm up here getting ready to share a budget calendar for 2024 already. We haven't even finished 2022 yet. Give me 1 second. All right. All right, well, here is the calendar. And as we have done in the past, I've got them color-coded. The dark blue are school board work sessions and meetings. The light green are the EAC meetings, and then the light tan are the Board of Supervisors meetings for your information, just so you know when they're meeting. So the calendar usually starts in October and goes all the way through April. And this month, we are bringing forth the draft of the calendar today and hope to have it approved at the next board meeting on the 13th. We will also look at year-end results at the next item. Let's see, so we've got, then in November, the House Appropriations Committee will meet on the 14th, and then the Senate Finance Appropriation Committee will meet on the 17th and 18th. They will provide some information on their year ends. I skipped right over our audit presentation, so on November 10th, we will have a short audit committee meeting during the day, and then we will bring forth the audit results and final year-end presentation. Mr. Chris Banta from Cherry Becker, or from Brown Edwards, will be here to present the audit. And then in December, I will be taking on the 13th the carryover request to the Board of Supervisors for approval so that we can have the ordinance to go ahead and book the carryover numbers from the audit. The governor's budget is tentatively proposed to come out around the 16th, at which time we will really start looking at revenue numbers. So we will bring the governor's budget back to you January 5th. And what you will see from January on, I heard a little rumor that the school board may be desirous of changing to going to a work session on the first Thursday and just a board meeting on the third Thursday. So I have scheduled the budget calendar accordingly. So on January 5th, we will look at the governor's budget, review CIP and all of the replacement schedules like we typically do. Then we will bring the CIP back for a separate adoption on the 19th so that we can provide that over to the county. The General Assembly will convene on the 11th. It is a short year, so hopefully, if everything goes well, we'll actually get a budget on time, approved early, and move forward. So then, let's see, moving to February, at the work session, we will be presenting the compensation and benefits, and we will have, we met with folks for the compensation study this past week. And we hope to have a contract in place in the next 2 weeks. And we actually hope to bring them in November so that you can meet them and get a little bit of background about them. Then we'll have the final presentation in February 2nd of what their recommendations are. So the first crossover will happen on February 2nd as well. Typically when crossover happens, that is when the House and the Senate come up with their budgets, and they have some good hard numbers, but they hand it over to the other folks to kind of take a look at, and they then come to their final agreed upon General Assembly budget. When these calc tools come out, when the crossover occurs, when the Virginia Department of Education receives the information, it takes them about a week to prepare what we need so that we can estimate our revenues. So hopefully, we won't have any information on the 2nd since that's when crossover is occurring, but we do hope at the February 16th meeting to be able to provide an update on revenue. This would include county revenue and crossover revenue, and also bring forth the department budgets. We will also hold the public hearing that same day. This is later than usual. In the past, we always held that at the second board meeting in January, but if we're not going to have a second regular board meeting, we'll just push it to the next one, and that will be more than adequate. Then on February 12th is when the General Assembly should adjourn. So we do hope to have numbers, within a week and a half of that, within a week, it depends. If the General Assembly is extended, that could go on to the 27th, was what I found out. So then on the 2nd, we would bring the final budget presentation to you for review and final comments, and then have it adopted. We'll bring it as action item on the 16th of March. So then we will take it over to the Board of Supervisors, probably at their April 11th presentation. So that's, in a nutshell, kind of where we're headed.
Sounds good.
Very good.
And if there are any comments or changes desired,
Okay.
I can add a couple meetings in there if you want.
One question related to surplus. Do we have any idea yet? We're going to have a joint meeting towards the end of this month.
That's my next.
That's the next item on the agenda,
Is it
Mr.
next?
Grenier.
Okay. All right, let's go there then.
Item number 2.04, preliminary June 30th, 2022 year-end surplus or year-end results.
All right.
Ms. Peterson.
So this is a draft, and I'll review each of the sections. I'm going to go over to the left-hand side of the page that you have first, which is the general fund. We have listed, and I said this once, but I want to reiterate, this is a draft. I am still finding things that need to be cleaned up, so numbers may change between now and when we finalize. Revenue surplus, we got a little bit more in state revenue than we expected, barely, but a little bit. We weren't in a hole, so that was good. The federal revenues, we got 272,000 more. This is mainly due to Medicaid revenue that comes into the general fund. And then other revenues, that number is showing as, includes $200,000 that will get moved out. So that will be only 60,000, not meeting full budget expectations. So overall, 67,000 revenue surplus, probably one of the closest surpluses I've seen. Moving to the next section, we have personnel surplus, $1,062,741.61, less than 1% of contracted budget. So that was pretty tight. It came out probably pretty good with all of the increases that we did in the mid-years and with nutrition associates and the bus driver increases and all of that. But that's not a lot of room to work with. Moving to the department savings. I'm not going to go through every department. I will highlight that in some of these departments, like the elementary instruction, they overspent because of receiving additional state money for the summer school. So really their revenues offset that, and I will move some budget out of the finance department to cover that extra spending for their program. And then facilities and operations, they're over budget mostly because utilities really jumped up during the end of the year. And
In
whatever
the
I have
future,
left.
you may want to give Ms. Hogan or Dr. Hogan a heads up on that, because the look on her face when she saw that number was,
Yeah, to reiterate, they didn't overspend, it's just they got more offsetting revenue, so it's a
Right.
paper thing.
Did,
You can breathe again, Ms. Hogan.
One question, I know the expiration for the federal funds, we took care of all of our federal funds, right?
The ones that came due as of September
As of
30th of this
September.
year has all been
So
spent.
you got those.
Yes. But when I get to the grant fund, you'll see we have a lot more left to spend.
Okay.
So then overall from our departments, we have $581,183.78 of expenditure savings for a grand total of $1.7 million to be carried forward. $57,379.72 will be carried forward and put back into department budgets to cover purchase orders that were open at the end of the year. So these were purchases that were made earlier in the year and for whatever reason, product had not come in, but we had already set aside the budget to cover that. And that is a typical process that we do. And then following what we typically like to do, putting half to major capital and then the remaining to minor capital, that would give about $826,000 to both major capital and minor capital, which is not a lot. And then at the very bottom, you can see we still have our emergency contingency intact of $2 million, and that will carry forward as well.
any questions?
I think you need to share this with the board, that we're not gonna have 5 million to, every year to, I don't know where they think we get this, but to give away for capital projects, so.
That'll be good information to have.
I know we do this every year too, that 2 million. So we really, do we have 3 points? We only had 1.7 because the 2's built in, right?
Well, the 2 is carried over every year.
Right. So it's just the 1.7. I mean, that's really, really tight.
It's tight budgeting.
Yeah.
well, our infrastructure, like we've spoken about, is aging tremendously. And Todd, you're doing a great job of keeping things up. I know that there's a lot going on and there's a lot still to be done. So it's not like we are throwing money away. We're just simply trying to maintain our buildings.
Inflation.
Thank you.
So then on the right-hand side, if you want to look at the other funds, the fleet replacement fund will carry over $871,958. Instructional resources will carry over about $43,000. The tech replacement, $885,000. The nutrition fund will carry over $7.3 million, which is a little higher than usual for them, but due to the prior year feeding all the 100% of the students under the Free Act, their reimbursement rate was higher, and they made additional funds that we could not have been able to plan. Student activity funds, 2.5 million. Moving into the grant fund, the 1.8 million are some like real dollars that are owed out on the where we've got the money and we owe or we spent it and we have the money left in the grant. The multi-year budget, that 14 million, about 13 million of that is related to federal grants that are multi-year. And I would garner to say about 11.5 million are the COVID grants that are left yet to spend. This will include the ESER 2, the ESER 3, all of the HVAC projects, and all the other little grants.
What's the deadline for that?
Pardon?
Is there a deadline?
The ESER 2 ends in 23, and ESER 3 ends in 24. And I do plan on, as soon as we can get the year end wrapped up, circling back around with the directors regarding what's left over in those ESER grants and maybe reallocating. We have an opportunity with some of the unfinished learning grants that did not get spent as, we did not need as much for summer school as we thought. So that left some on the table that we could direct towards other needs for unfinished learning. In our minor capital fund, we've got our minor capital reserves, and please don't get confused. These are June 30th numbers, so they are not current. These are several months back. So please don't look at this and say, oh, we've got 1.2 million to spend now, because that's not reflective of today. That's reflective of June 30th. So at June 30th, there was 1.2 million in unallocated minor capital, just under $500,000 in allocated projects. CMP had about 247,000 in reserves not allocated to projects, where typically with CMP, what we do is we set aside the 1 million, they go to projects, and then when the projects come in under budget, they go back, that money goes back into reserves to be used at the discretion of the director for necessary projects. The in-process CMP projects was just under $1 million. The playground replacements was just under the $700,000 that was allocated for year one. If you recall, the other $700,000 will be allocated in the current year out of that 1.2 million up at the top. Turf replacement of 175 for Bogle and 120 for William Byrd. And then starting with fiscal year 23, we will be putting aside money for Glenver High as well. We've got the 98,000 set aside for the digital mapping grant, who actually bumped into them today walking through central office, mapping our building, and I think they'd already been to a couple of schools. Music uniforms, I know it's kind of odd to see music uniforms in minor capital. However, with music uniforms, typically they schedule them 1 year choir, 1 year marching band, and to ensure that we can carry that funds forward, we transfer money out of the secondary instruction department into the minor capital every year. And then when they need to set up and purchase the uniforms for band or choir, they can do so.
And that's like a 10-year period where they replace every 2 years, I think. Is that correct?
I'm getting a nod, yes.
Is that right? Thank you.
And then some vending grants. So the vending grants were where we used to get $50,000 every year from Pepsi, but that stopped several years back. So the amount that's left in here is just going to be spent down. It had been allocated to all of the schools, so each of the schools knows how much they have left to be able to spend out of that pot. So then moving into the major capital reserves, we've got 2.9 million of unallocated major capital reserves, 91,950 set aside for the HR payroll system. The building renovation for William Byrd High, there's 5.3 million just under that, between allocated and unallocated, that's in the major capital reserves. We set aside some money for the two elementary schools, and then we have a little bit left in William Byrd High athletic fields from 2017 that I think we're going to finally be able to spend a little bit out, and spend it down in this year, in '23.
Let me ask you this. Can we use that towards the light project to help fund that? I mean, if we've got it there, if I understand.
I think the majority of that money has been already allocated in a purchase order encumbrance
Into something else?
for William Byrd High,
Okay.
for their
Okay.
athletic fields.
I just thought that was a way to.
If I'm not mistaken, it might be for painting the stadium.
Okay.
No, separate. That didn't come out. I wasn't listening to what Mr. Greenway asked, but it didn't come out of the contingency payment the state.
Right.
No,
Yeah, there's
I'm talking about
turf
the athletic
project.
fields turf project.
No, it didn't come out of the turf. Are you talking about the which turf project? Are you talking about the installation of the?
The one from
artificial turf at
2017.
William Byrd High?
Ages ago, yeah.
Yes, the payment came out of that, sorry.
I thought I was right.
Yes, it did.
Thank you for confirming.
Leftover amount from that.
So then we move into our bond fund. William Byrd High, that looks a little odd because that's what we've spent and how much the county owes us back. We typically spend the money, and they have the cash set aside in an account, and they will periodically give us, reimburse us for our expenditures. So that's how much they owe us at the end of the year. And then the other two amounts that you see for the elementaries are the budget set aside from allocations we did not use yet, to be used in the future when we can. And then insurance funds, I will talk about them on the next page. And we've got 1.4 million in the OPEB trust fund as of the end of the year. So then the other thing that was asked of me was to bring the health insurance reserves. So on this next page, we do have a listing from 2009 all the way through 6/30/22 of our health insurance reserves balance. And then also for our dental insurance fund and our risk management fund, all three of them. One thing that we have is a letter from our insurance consultant. So if you can see at the bottom, we've got 6.4 million sitting in reserves right now. And our insurance consultant does recommend having that stay between 3.7 and 4.2 million. Now, if you look at our revenues compared to our expenditures for 2021 and 2022, you'll see that we have gotten to where we're spending more. And I think that is a trend that you may continue to see. And so I would not, I think it is good to have this balance here because I see it still getting chunked away with claims costs. So I would be nervous to use this for anything else at this point.
Why did he recommend less?
They just have their calculations. I'm not sure how they come up with that.
Here's
Interesting.
what I would say, and the reason I asked that question is, so they're saying somewhere around, let's average it out to 4 million, and let's
So you got
say
2
we want to
million.
be, yeah, and let's say we even want to be more conservative than that.
$1 million.
Yeah, throw another million on top of it, or $1.5 million even. All I'm saying is, if we need to work on some of these capital projects, minor capital or CMP, there's $1 million that I feel comfortable. Again, I'm no expert, but if the experts tell us 3.7 to 4.2, and I said, well, I want to be even more comfortable, I want to be at 5.5, there's $1 million that we could use for some of these CMP projects. And I'm not saying do it today, but it's in our feather in our cap to remember that's there, and depending on maybe another presentation from Mr. Cagle's, at another work session, that's an opportunity that we could take, in my mind, again, I'm only one, $1 million to throw at some of these needed, necessary projects. Just my thought.
Very good.
When, And I guess I would just follow up with a question. And I know you're ultra conservative, and you should be. But I mean, I think, going by the industry experts, plus what you're saying, I don't, there may be a trend and cost of going up medically as well, but we also, insurance has gone up as well. I think we should keep that open if we need to see that in the future. It's just my opinion, too.
Brent, just a question, Brent and Cheryl, do y'all understand that's the reserves because we're self-funded?
Yes.
Okay.
Now, I will point out, the revenue that goes in here comes from employees who pay a part of their insurance, and comes from the general fund who pays for the insurance for employees, so it's an employee benefit. So it would not be my recommendation to take money out of the health insurance fund and put it into a capital fund. It would be my recommendation, should the board desire, that we could transfer this back to the general fund and use it to fulfill any employee needs in the general fund.
We have precedent in doing this a few years ago, right?
We put it back in the general fund.
All right, and then the general fund, we spent it from there back.
It was for employee raises.
Okay. So we could, all right, so.
Well, we wouldn't have taken it.
But either way, we've got a lot of money in that account. So if we want to say that, I'm okay with that. Let's give it back to the employees. Let's not just have that excessive balance. I would like to see us go to the CMP, but if that's not the way to do it, I just don't want to see us carry an inflated value. We've used this before. So maybe we use it for payroll funds where we wouldn't use some funds out of our general operating fund that we could then go to CMP. I
Which
think there's a
may
way-
reduce that
There's a way to
fund.
do it.
Reduce that fund, which we may be able to do something else with.
Well, and to throw another piece of the puzzle out to you, we are out to bid for a new health insurance plan. We go through this process with the county. As part of the RFP that we're putting on the street, we are going to ask for a second plan. And so, because right now, if you're in the plan, you're in the plan, and that's all you have. You don't have a second option that you can pick from. And most companies, as you know, will have two options that you could pick from, or three or four, or however many. I would, if we change from a one-plan structure that we've had for many years back to a two-plan structure, we are going to see some people take take the cheaper route, and some people take the more expensive route. It would be my concern for us to craft the premiums and run into losses and not have the balance here to cover us. So it would be my recommendation to maybe fetter this out for another year after we field what happens in the next budgeting process. Just because I've never worked with the insurance company to craft rates on two different plans at one time. I've only looked at it one plan and crafting it to come up with what the premiums would be. And I would be really concerned if we have this money that is set aside for insurance and we miss the boat totally, and we all of a sudden are seeing higher claims and not enough people in the right plan to cover that.
Well, if they
Why would
didn't,
we take that chance? Why would we risk that for our employees? Because this is their balance, right? This is their, if what we're talking about is, this is their, all that reserve is there for them to make sure, that we're self-funded. So I'm not sure if we're taking a big swing at, I get we're trying to save the employees some money, but we also have fiduciary responsibility to make sure that, I don't want to take big swings at something that, but we do this every 2 years in bidding this out, right? And at every 2 years?
We've not bid it out for a while.
Okay. Well, when your predecessor.
And the
told
last
me
time we bid it out-
Every 2 years.
I think we get into like 5-year contracts with 1 or 2 year renewals.
Okay.
So it is, because you don't want to change your health insurance carrier,
Right.
the administrator frequently, because it's a lot of back-end work for them and for the employees and for us.
Sure.
So we don't do that often. And I'm not saying we're going to miss the boat. I'm going in the.
Well, if we
trying to
miss it,
carry-
we're gonna miss it by double what the industry experts say we should be holding in reserves. That's my only contention.
But
When we get that, we can take a look at it.
Yeah.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
what we probably have with 2 plans, if people opt for cheaper, then they're gonna have to pay more, deductibles or whatever. They have more expense on their end if you start the 2 plan. So,
I have a question regarding one more thing, just to clarify. You mentioned the Pepsi is no longer in that contract is benefiting our schools? Like they're not
They're-
getting funds anymore?
They get the commissions
Okay.
from the machines themselves. But back in the day when the contract first started, on top of getting commissions, then Pepsi would just give $50,000 donation to the.
Do you
school.
think that's something we probably need to look at? I don't know how many years we've been in that contract, but interestingly, I was at a PTSO meeting the other day, and that was brought up. And they were also complaining about the prices when they purchased drinks from them. So I don't know when that contract is up, but it might be something we need to look into if we can give that money back to our schools by,
I think we're kind of early in the contract.
are we?
Yeah, I think Mr. Kidda, when he was here, signed a new contract.
All right, check into that for me and let me know, because I'd be interested to know, because I want to get back to them on that. I told them that I would look into that.
Sure.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Ms. Peterson. Item 2.05, request to add a designated parent-teacher conference day. Dr. Stigall.
Afternoon. Okay. Oh. Go back one. There we go. All right. So the division set out looking for a clear and purposeful way to get parents reconnected back into our schools after the pandemic. And of course, that caused some restrictions and where parents weren't able to get into our buildings. So what the division did is send out a survey to parents asking their preference on teacher conference days and like we had done in the past. From the results of that survey, 1,700 parents responded. 80% indicated that they actively participated in conferences in the previous years. 47 indicated that they prefer phone conferences or online conferences. 53% said that they prefer in-person conferences. And the question was asked, how likely would you request a conference? 69% said they would participate in a conference. 27 said they would participate if requested by the teacher. And 4% said they were likely not to participate in a conference. Overall, looking at all this data, 60% said that they would like to have a designated day. So for designated just for parent-teacher conferences, 22% said they had no opinion, and 19% said they would not like to have a designated day. Keeping in mind that by adding a designated day means that that would be a non-student day, so that could have been a result of that percentage.
one quick question on the 27%. The teachers usually do request, well, I'm sure they stay on top of it all year, but,
They do, if it's,
so 96% probably would do the
that's right,
conference.
that's right.
Okay.
So what we were proposing is that we add a parent-teacher conference day, and we would like that to be Tuesday, November the 1st. And that would be a non-student day. So the reason it's coming before you, because our current calendar has that as a student day, we need to change our calendar for that to be a non-student day and designate that as our parent-teacher conference day. We would ask our teachers to work regular day hours, noting in the past that our parent-teacher conferences day used to go to 7 p.m., and so we are requesting that this time we do it during normal school hours to accommodate our staff as well. Teachers are encouraged to invite parents and to schedule either in-person, remote, or phone conferences. and at the parent's preference. And then if a parent's not available on that day, we always allow them to schedule conferences, phone, in person, virtual, on any other day that's mutually agreeable to both the parent and the teacher. And we would do that in a timely manner to accommodate the parents' concerns. So here's the November change. I just pulled out the one November. You can see the 8th was already there as a non-student day because that is election day. That's when we typically had parent-teacher conference day. However, we are requesting that we move that to November 1st, and that would be the parent-teacher conference day, and the 8th would remain as a teacher work day. Since that's election day, we have lots of staff who like to go to their own students' conferences. They also like to go and vote. It's just a good time to give our staff some flexibility. So what that would look like on the 8th, which is the teacher workday that's already scheduled. In the past, we have allowed our teachers to document hours, which would be 7 hours of parental contacts. And what we've done in the past is if they document that time, provide that to their principals, they do not have to work that day. We are still going to keep that in place because our teachers have already started logging hours, and we want to give them that flexibility. So the day will still be closed to students. It is our election day. Teachers are logging their 7 hours. All staff can log hours except for administration and administrative assistants. And staff who choose not, this would be their choice, who choose not to log time, then they would complete a workday in the building on that day. And there will not be professional development attached to that day. Then February 13th is, that's on the schedule already as a teacher workday. The only thing we have to do there is we're changing that to say parent-teacher conference day. So that will be a normal workday for teachers, and they would hold conferences in the building during normal work hours. Staff would work normal hours, except instructional assistants are currently not scheduled to work on that day and still would not work on that day. Conferences may be held again in person, virtual, or over the phone, and same stipulations there. If the parents aren't able to meet, we will find another date that works with them, and we will do that in a timely manner. And there's no professional development attached to this day. In the past, there has been a requirement of 2 hours of professional development. We are taking that away since we've added extra early dismissal days for PD. So we're taking that opportunity away. So staff recommends that we make the November 1st a non-student day, and that we hold that aside for parent-teacher conferences during the normal contract hours. Election day will continue to be a paid workday, and staff will continue to log time, and they will not have to work as long as they have their 7 hours of log contact. And conferences, of course, can be scheduled in person, virtually, or by phone. So any questions about that recommendation?
I don't believe so. Well, any questions? Will this be a action item or consent agenda
I think we
item?
could put that on consent so for next
Consent.
week if everybody's in agreement. Of course, I polled you all earlier to make sure we can go ahead and announce that
Yes.
when there was consensus. And so we've already announced that to staff, and we'll get notification out to parents hopefully by the end of the week.
Wonderful. Thank you, Dr. Stegall. All right, Mr. Kegels for the final 3, and hopefully they will be somewhat quick here. 2.06, permission to surplus metal storage containers and other items.
I didn't hear what you said. Did you ask me to be quick?
Yes.
Yeah.
I have to blame Dr. Nicely for project updates. He requested that I do those. It's going to take a little while to
That's
go
fine.
through all those.
We'll put you on speed dial.
Chuck, are we, okay, so I can't see it from this far away. Are we on, which one?
Surplus. Metal storage containers.
Okay, yes, sorry. Yeah, so the metal storage containers were purchased during COVID. There's one at each school, at least. Some schools have more than one. Several of the schools have asked for them to be removed. They're eyesores. They're expensive to move. They cost us about $500 every time we move one of them. And of course, then storage would be an issue also. So we're asking for permission, or for you to consider giving us permission at the next meeting, to surplus those as schools request for them to be removed.
Okay. Any questions? Will that be
That'll go on consent.
consent? All right, thank you. 2.07, Green Valley Elementary School, West Virginia Water Authority easement request.
Yes, sir. So you can see in the bottom right-hand corner down here, they've requested an easement. They're doing sewer upgrade. I think we're the last piece is for them to get the easement. You have to grant permission for me to sign that request. This doesn't really have any impact on the school. It's as far away from the school as you can possibly get on the property there. And it's down in that, right along, basically right along the property line down there.
Yeah, that's probably floodplain.
Is it the striped white area?
That's the temporary easement for the construction piece of it, and the
Down below the ball.
permanent piece is right there with it, yeah.
What is it for the construction of what?
They're doing sewer line upgrades
In the area?
in the area.
Is that-
Yeah, not the school, it's the
Yeah.
area.
So,
Yeah.
and I brought this up last time with the AEP thing. You've got to work with them, right? But in all honesty, we need to remember, like the North Side project, it took forever to get that, whatever it was, we needed to switch to the
Water.
public water. Once you give these things, if this were a private, you'd be asking for, and I'm not suggesting we ask for some, but the point is, they need to remember when we need something to reciprocate. It's just like we got a container at Cundiff that's sat there for 2.5 months waiting to get hooked up. I mean, that's a joke. It should have been done before we, the day or whatever. But, and if they had wanted the easement, well, just give us the easement. We appreciate it. They should work with us on the other side. I don't know how you make that work, but I'm telling you, in business, it wouldn't be this easy. But because it's land we really don't, it's not affecting my house or your house, we say, yep, just go ahead, we're okay with it. But we got a lot of projects that come by us. Somehow, I just hope they'll remember that, we're good stewards and we're playing nice.
Probably dealing with different departments there, I would think.
Yeah, and I will say it's a goal of mine to build good relationships with all these folks, with AEP, with Western Virginia Water Authority, all those. And if you looked at this particular project from their perspective, we've had this for months, and for whatever reason, it didn't move forward to you guys. And so when I became aware of it, and then, I went to Dr. Nicely immediately and asked that, hey, we need to get this going for them because they're waiting on this. So I hear what you're saying about the leverage piece of it, but I'm also trying to build positive relationships with them and, get them to help us when we need help
good with that.
by doing what they need us to do as well.
We should have had leverage with AEP to get, you heard it, the two of you heard it in the meeting we had with Title I kids. At Cundiff, we don't even have a room to remediate these kids. We're doing it in open areas, and so, and again, it's not your fault, but that's frustrating, wait 2.5 months to get not a trailer, a cottage hooked up.
Yeah, and just so everybody knows, part of the reason for that is that's going to require a power outage to the school. So we've scheduled that for the teacher workday.
But it's too much trouble to do it on a Saturday or an evening. So, yeah, so anyway, go ahead.
Is that area where that easement's going to go, is that currently paved?
No, it's
It's-
gravel.
Gravel, okay.
It's a road around the
Gotcha.
field.
So they'll just put it back to the condition it's in.
where it was.
Consent agenda item, anybody have any issues with that?
No.
Do
Glad
you
you
don't need
found it.
action on that today?
No, sir.
Good.
Okay.
Item number 2.08, project updates.
Okay, so I'll
He does
run.
have a long list, so in the interest of time, if you all want to ask about projects, you can do it that way, however you want to do it, but he does have
What about
a list to go over.
can we just get an email?
You can do that.
Yeah.
And then we can
work
just
it.
individually
I'd
ask
like to know
questions?
today, because I've been asked today for one.
About Bird.
Sure, sure.
Yeah.
Sure, and
it's-
any other like hot button ones you have, ones you want to know about personally, please do feel free to ask. I've got them all.
Mr. Greenman.
It's it's not the building, it's the softball field still. Those guys are hammering me over
On
that
the,
softball
irrigation
field.
system?
Well, they don't know how to operate it, nobody's shown them how to operate it, and the field's tore all to pieces. And for them to get grass back for next year, they would like to get the area seeded or whatever we're gonna do, and to understand how to operate the irrigation system so they can germinate some seed before it freezes,
Yeah,
which they
and-
may be too late anyway.
Right, and so they're not finished yet. He had one head to replace and some to adjust, which required a special tool, which he had to order, all of those things. But as of today, all of that stuff is here. All of the pressure reducer and the tools needed to adjust the heads are all here. And he's supposed to finish that this week. Now, once he does, he'll go through and he'll train all of them. He'll do Jason and Tammy and Greg, show everybody how to operate the system.
Well, are they going to come and fix the field so they can germinate some seed or something?
Yeah, the trenches still need a little bit of top dressing. They've settled a
I haven't
little
been up
bit,
there,
and
so I have
so,
no idea.
yeah, he'll come back, he'll top dress those, and then put the seed down.
Okay.
I just like one, well, you already told me about one in my district, but then maybe, what is the status of the Oak Grove playground?
Oh, the one that burned down? Well, so that one's already slated to be replaced, thank goodness, because it means the materials, they have a very long lead time, and they're already on order. So, you know, at least the silver lining is that the stuff is already on the way. It's being investigated by the fire marshal, and as soon as they've given us clearance to demo the stuff that's there, we'll get it out. It's dangerous. There's melted metal pipes sticking up out of the ground and, you know, that sort of thing. So we'll go in and clean it up as soon as we know for sure that they're done with their investigation.
Insurance.
That's where we are. Ms. Peterson was working on an insurance claim for us.
Submitted it?
Not much we can do until we get the numbers and stuff.
All right. If we have any other questions, we'll just give you a call or shoot you an email.
Sure, absolutely.
Before we go into close, Mr. Hudson had a comment that he wanted to make.
Hey, I just wanted to thank our superintendent. I don't know if everybody here knows, just give him a little recognition. So a friend of mine who works in one of our schools, they've got a child that doesn't fully understand English language yet. And being that Mr. Nicely here is fluent in Spanish, went out, took time out of his busy day, and from my understanding, read a test so this child could understand what was on it. I don't know the full details, but I just think that's worthy of, I think that's worthy of recognition that, you know, your top guy here
Gets back
takes the
in, that's
time
nice.
to go to one of our schools and help educate a child. So,
He's very versatile.
Yeah, these were actually.
And well-versed in Spanish.
and I called you mister, I'm
Super.
sorry.
That's okay. Yeah, it was a lot of fun. Actually, while I was out there, fire department shows up for the preschool program. They brought their ambulance, and Brian Klingenpeel did the whole fire safety thing, you know, showing that, you know, firemen in their suits are people underneath, and even for preschoolers, they were able to get that. So I was treated to that little demonstration while I was there, but it was a lot of fun. It's always great to work with kids.
I think that's great that he's willing to do that. Thank you, Ken.
Mr. Greenway?
Yes, so, just for further clarification, you're gonna let us know on if we can have an advocate to come in and talk to us about solar and the different types of construction on schools, correct?
Right. So, yeah, so the question is, in general terms, kind of giving the board some information about different construction approaches, what we know so far about, you know, potential solar kinds of things and so forth. So I spoke with, you know, legal counsel. We can definitely do that as long as it's kept general. We might do that as a group, you know, in terms of, because one of your questions was if whoever comes in from a company, if they were, you know, to be awarded a future contract, legally that's okay. You might be concerned about appearances for that kind of person. So we could be, in that name, we could either do that in small groups, or we could do it as long as it's kept very general in, you know, open session. So we could do it either way. As far as doing it before October 25th, which you were also asking about, we'd have to either, you know, schedule separate meetings or schedule an extra meeting.
Well, if we're gonna go into this joint meeting, and I don't know that solar will be thrust upon us, but if it is,
But that is.
we ought to have some.
Yeah, I think it will be.
Yeah, we ought to have some knowledge. And, oh, by the way, we've heard from a couple of members that we should consider allowing somebody to buy the facility and lease it back to us, which will cost us 4 or 5 times whatever the deal is. But I think, so we, you know, it'd be nice to have somebody. Maybe we can't do it. I've asked a couple of questions because of the Bird project when I was in on construction meeting. that makes it very nice to hear some of these people that have actually lived it, know what they're talking about, to tell us what, what their experience is.
And another option would be, and Mr. Lennon, correct me if I'm wrong, yeah, I think that for October 25th, that joint meeting, there are two big things happening. One is, kind of a final report from the Citizens Advisory Committee, and they may touch on some of those topics. But the other big thing that, we're hoping to have pretty close to finished is the information from, Balzer and Associates, and of course, they've subcontracted with RRMM to do some work, and that's all undergoing. So the goal is to have that ready for October 25th. And so I think one of the thoughts was, I think I sent this out to you all, hold December, was it 7th?
Yes.
For a second meeting, so it may be that at that time you get into those more specific conversations, and so in terms of sort of informing ourselves with some of that information, another option would be to do that between the two meetings, so.
I won't be here the 5th and 6th, which wouldn't, but as long as it's the 7th, that'd be okay.
Yeah, it will be the 7th, and I think we will have time in between those two meetings to
And if you talk about it
Dive
on
in.
the 6th, I won't be here at that work session, so
Okay.
I won't be here the 5th.
So either
or
way, we
6th.
might need to schedule something in addition to what's already on the calendar.
Yeah.
Last thing, and I'm gonna hammer this one, is the SROs. Now, we can talk about it in private, but I wanna do it in public. We've asked, we've worked with the Board of Supervisors in asking for the SROs, and I'm gonna ask for an update here publicly so that we know that this is still in front of us. I don't like kicking the can, I don't like waiting. I know I'm impatient, y'all know I'm impatient, but this one to me is a baby project to me that needs to happen. And I know the sheriff's office has gotten, correct me if I'm wrong, and I'll defer to both, 5 or 6 folks. Am I right about that?
So we have 2 full-time, 4 part-time.
Right.
With 1 getting ready to finish up training at the end of the year.
So you'll actually have 7. How many has the police department got for us?
And I want to add too, we also paid Deputy Mullins.
Correct.
That's in addition to that we pay the salary for. which
And we
also-
asked for the Board of Supervisors to pick up that tab, right?
I did, just because, and the reason we did that was because, the decision was made, it was the right decision for him to be stationed at Byrd Middle School there. But knowing that they had already budgeted for that position, we requested that they, reimburse, instead of us paying the cost then, since they have the money budgeted, for them to do that. And so, that request was declined. But we are taking that salary out of Byrd construction budget and moving to personnel, so that'll free up. But we did ask for the county to consider, paying that, just because we knew that was already budgeted. that
So they
position.
turned us down for the one extra SRO position we had.
Yes, sir.
Correct.
And
I want
we
everybody to
talked-
hear that.
And we talked to, individually probably, and it was said that the grant is on its way, but that's not taking care of the immediate.
Yeah.
And I'm sure y'all heard the same thing.
Well,
and
and
so-
so
so-
now I was told yesterday that the grant has been.
Yeah, so the grant they've gotten, that's on the police side, and that's to fund the elementary
That
SROs.
piece.
And to date, they've not been able to fill, any of those positions.
So we've got 0 from the police.
But we're not getting anywhere on the one that we wanted.
And
to
one
fund.
not funded, good point, Mike. One not funded, none from the police, and 7 from the sheriff's department.
Well, and let me clarify too on this grant. One of the main reasons we didn't put in for the grant is it specified you had to be assigned at a school. Well, at the time, we knew you're not going to be able to get 16 people right off the bat. And then number 2, we had already kind of decided we were going to fund some of these positions. So in that grant, they had to be unfunded positions, like positions that were not currently funded, as well as you had to be assigned to a certain school. So that just really threw that out the door for us
That's the
and our
reason
folks.
police-
So that's why it was,
They
because it came to
applied for
us,
the grant.
right, it came to the sheriff's department first.
Right.
We found out about it, but then we sent it back to the board, basically telling them this is not going to fit how we currently do this.
Mm-hmm.
Because it would tie our hands to the folks that we have, that we knew we could be able to hire to be able to put them in one school. Well, that's not going to do us any good when we have 16 elementary schools.
Right. So $1.7 million surplus, somewhere in that ballpark, right? Less than 1% surplus, would that be fair?
0.86.
One SRO position unfunded that they will not fund, have requested and they will not fund. 0
70,000.
from the police department and 7 from the sheriff's department. Where is our focus? Where is our passion to get this done? You know, the grant's great, don't get me wrong, we ought to use it if we can, right? But I don't need a grant to tell me we need SROs in these schools. Thank you.
All right, item 3.01, Mr. Hudson, if you would read us into closed session, please.
Yes, sir, Mr. Chairman. I move that the Roanoke County School Board convene in closed session for the following: to discuss ongoing personnel matters under investigation pursuant to the personnel exemption at 2.2-3711A1 of the Code of Virginia, and for consultation with legal counsel and briefings by staff members pertaining to actual or probable litigation, and consultation with legal counsel regarding specific legal matters for requiring the provision of legal advice by such counsel pursuant to 2.2-3711A7 of the Code of Virginia, and for discussion of the award of public contract involving the expenditure of public funds, including interviews of bidders or offerers, and discussion of the terms or scope of such contract where discussion in open session would adversely affect the bargaining position or negotiating strategy of the public body at 2.2-3711A29 of the Code of Virginia.
Motion and a second, Madam Clerk, the roll.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am. And we do not anticipate any action from closed session today, so those watching online, no need to stay tuned.